This is a presentation on the use of the present perfect simple, the time expressions it usually appears with, and the differences with the past simple. It is intended for third and fourth years of ESO. To form the present perfect simple, we need the auxiliary verb have and the past participle of the verb. We have to put the verb have in the present. So it has two forms: have for all for all subjects except for third person singular, and has for the third person singular. The past participle of the verb is formed with the ending ed for regular verbs. If the verb already ends in an e, we only add the d. So for example, for play, the past participle of play is played. We add ed to the verb. Jugar, jugado. For irregular verbs, it is the third column in the list of irregular verbs. For example, for the verb eat, the past participle is eaten. Or for the verb sell, the past participle is sold. The third column. The affirmative is formed with have or has and the past participle. For example, Julie has played that game many times. Julie is a third person singular, so we use has plus played. Julie and her brother have sold a book online. Julie and her brother is a third person plural, so we use have. For the negative, we use the negative form of have, haven't or hasn't. Julie hasn't played against Frank. Julie and her brother haven't sold their toys online. When we ask questions, we have to remember that the subject goes in between the two parts of the verb. So we have or has plus the subject and the past participle. For example, has Julie played that game? Positive answer, yes she has. Negative, no she hasn't. Have Julie and her brother sold anything on the internet? The positive is yes they have, and the negative, no they haven't. There are some time expressions that are typically used with the present perfect. The first one we are going to look at is ever. In questions, it means alguna vez. For example, have you ever visited the Science Museum? ¿Has visitado alguna vez el Museo de la Ciencia? In negative sentences, however, it means nunca o jamás. I haven't ever visited it. Nunca, jamás lo he visitado. Instead of a negative with ever, we can form a positive sentence with the word never, which is negative, and which will make the sentence negative. Remember, the verb must be in the positive. For example, I have never visited the Science Museum. Nunca he visitado el Museo de Ciencia. This is the same as I haven't ever visited the Science Museum. Already. We use already in positive sentences to mean ya. Jane has already visited it. Jane ya lo ha visitado. Yet. We use yet in negative sentences and in questions. In negative sentences, it will mean aún, todavía. Jack hasn't visited it yet. Jack no lo ha visitado todavía. And in questions, it means ya. Have your friends visited the museum yet? ¿Han visitado tus amigos el museo ya? So, watch, already is typically used in affirmative sentences and yet in negatives and questions. Just. We translate just together with a verb as acabar de. For example, Julian has just finished his driving test. Julian acaba de terminar su examen de conducir. So, It is the verb in the present perfect with the particle just, what we translate as acabar de. Notice the position of ever, never, already, and just in between the two parts of the verb. Yes, between have or has and the past participle. And notice the position of yet at the end of a negative or a question. For and since are two prepositions that are followed by time expressions and which are typically used in the present perfect. For is followed by a period of time, and it means durante. It marks the length of the period of time. So how long something has happened. For example, Susan has worked for Microsoft for 3 years. When we say this sentence, Susan has worked for Microsoft for 3 years, we mean that she still works there. She is still working for Microsoft. We can translate this into Spanish as Susan lleva trabajando para Microsoft durante 3 años. We don't use the corresponding pretérito perfecto in Spanish. We can say the same thing with since. Since is followed by a time expression, and we will mark when the period started. So the same sentence with since would be, Susan has worked for Microsoft since 2017. She still works there. So we can translate this sentence as Susan trabaja para Microsoft desde 2017. We translate it by a present in Spanish. Susan trabaja allí desde tal año. The graphic can show you how we can say these two things. How we can say these two things, the same thing with these two expressions. And that we mean that we still are doing that in the present. So since 2017 to 2020 is 3 years. Susan has worked for Microsoft for 3 years, or since 2017. Other typical expressions that we use with the present perfect are recently, recientemente. Have you spoken to Mark recently? Lately, últimamente. We haven't heard much of Laura lately. No hemos oído hablar de Laura últimamente, mucho últimamente. So far, hasta el momento. I have studied only one of the units so far. Solo llevo una unidad estudiada hasta ahora. Other time expressions are always, several times, over the years, etc., etc. Use of the present perfect simple. We can use the present perfect simple, as we have seen, with for or since to talk about actions that started in the past and continue in the present. We usually translate it with a present simple into Spanish. For example, we have lived here since 1995. Vivimos aquí desde el 1995. So this action started in 1995 and we still live here. The second use of the present perfect simple is to talk about past actions that affect the present. Actions that are important, relevant in the present. For example, I have seen Susan outside. Shall I call her? He visto a Susan afuera. ¿La llamo? The fact of seeing Susan outside is important now. A third use of the present perfect simple is to talk about past actions for which we don't say when they happened. For example, Jane has visited the museum 3 times. The important thing is that Jane has visited the museum. It is true that we add that she has visited it 3 times, but we don't say when. Finally, we use the present perfect simple to talk about very recent past actions, as we saw with the example of just. We need the particle just here. For example, another example is, my parents have just come back from Paris. Mis padres acaban de volver de París. We must differentiate between the uses of the present perfect simple and the uses of the past simple. Remember that we use the present perfect simple when the action is important in the present, and that we don't say when the action happened. Jane has already visited the museum 3 times. In contrast, we use the past simple for complete actions in the past, which happened at a specific time. For example, last time she visited it was 3 weeks ago. La última vez que ella lo visitó fue hace 3 semanas. So, we can see the difference between the present perfect and the past simple with these 2 sentences. Jane has already visited the museum, we don't say when. And last time she visited it, past simple, was 3 weeks ago. We say when it was. She visited the museum 3 weeks ago, so we use the past simple. Okay, I think this can be useful for you. Thank you very much. Enjoy.